Chapter 34. Chatter fell to whispers as I reached the top of the spiral stairs. Groups of 2, 3, and 4 students meandered at intervals, and I imagined what stories their hushed tones told. I spied Elrin Zen at the opposite end beyond the clusters of gossipers in a group of 3, but his friend Johan was nowhere to be seen. I focused straight ahead as I passed each group, offering them not so much as a glance. But when I arrived at my room, I found the frail boy I'd met on the exercise field rapping softly on my door. "Harbin? What are you doing here?" He turned, smiled, and then the rest of his features relaxed in something akin to relief.
"Oh, good. You're breathing."
"I am." He lowered his gaze, then picked the fingernails on one hand with the other.
"I worried you might have fallen when I saw Master Welling carrying you off the field."
Although I found his concern touching, his words brought wonderment. "And yet you knock at my door." He half shrugged.
"What better way to find out if you lived? I stopped at the infirmary, but you weren't there. I didn't know where else to go."
"Well, thank you for your concern." My attention shifted to Elrin's group. The others there diverted their gazes, but Elrin made no effort to hide his conspiratorial expression. Harbin of Milbury followed my line of sight.
"Let's go inside. We have to leave the door open, but there are no rules against my being there. Is that okay?"
I imagined the drawer of my simple dresser holding the scrolls I'd smuggled. How I longed to use them, but Harbin had come out of concern for me where others whispered behind my back. "Fine, yes, come in." After unlocking the door, I ushered Harbin inside. He flashed a hard glare down the hall in Elrin Zen's direction before his features softened and he crossed the threshold. As he cocked his chin toward the window, he said,
"Come have a look."
We stared out into the barren green field. 3 wide gashes of blackened soil cut through the grass to cross one another. I sighed. "Don't remind me."
"Just wait a minute. Watch."
"What am I looking for?"
"Shh."
He pressed a finger to his lips. A moment later, 2 figures adorned in white plate armor with gold trim crossed into view. They stood tall and walked across the field side by side. Their coverings gave the impression of broad shoulders, although I couldn't really tell. "Who are they?"
"Templars. They came through the portal room an hour ago, about a dozen of them. They met up with their commander on the front lawn before splitting into pairs. Then the patrols began."
"Right, but who are they?"
"They're an order of warriors whose stronghold is far in the northern mountains. The Hall of Templars, I believe they call it."
"Are they a religious sect?"
"You could say that. They dispatched one soldier to the chapel. He's been circling it since he arrived. That seems to imply some level of respect for holy places."
He cocked his chin again, this time in the soldier's direction.
"But look at those weapons. I wouldn't want to cross paths with them."
I eyed the massive wrapped hilt of a longsword sheathed and bouncing on one man's back. The other's weapon was an axe with the head of such breadth it could only be wielded by 2 strong hands. I probably couldn't heft its blade off the ground if I tried. My focus waned when my mind wandered to the cave where so many scrolls hid beneath the soil behind a rock. Even if I read the ones tucked in my dresser, I doubted I'd rank up enough to channel the source safely. And a trip to the cave to study the runes I'd seen in the remaining tome was going to prove a challenge if I couldn't get into the chapel. Harbin broke the stream of my thoughts.
"You still in there?"
"What?" "Oh, yeah, just thinking."
"It's not your fault, you know. You didn't ask them to come here."
"The demons, you mean?" "Well, there are things you don't know."
"Probably. But my ears are at your service if you want to talk about it."
When the soldiers passed out of my sight line on the opposite side from which they entered, I turned my attention to Harbin. His cheeks were concave, with little whiskers popping out at the disparate intervals of a young man who could only grow a patchy beard at best. Although his flesh was somewhat pale, his gray eyes shone with a bright alertness. A line of gray colored his otherwise auburn hair where it parted on one side. A narrow cleft chin rounded out his features.
"Don't feel obligated. I'm just letting you know I'm here if you want to talk."
"I don't feel that way. I just wouldn't know where to start. The last few days seem like weeks when compared to the slow pace of farm life. I've nearly died a few times." I leaned my head back and stared up at the ceiling. Now that the words escape my lips, I wonder why I'm still here.
"A few times?"
Warmth rushed to my face, and I shrugged one shoulder in an attempt to counteract its effect. Then I tilted my head toward the field. "Demons like these burned our farm and murdered my father. They chased me on my horse, who I had to abandon. Then the snow nearly killed me. Oh, and I shouldn't discount my conflict with a wolf." One eyebrow jumped twice.
Did you burn it?
A fresh recollection of Brunk raising the wolf overhead and cracking its back on his knee washed across my mind. Although Harbin seemed harmless, and even kind of nice, I wasn't ready to reveal the presence of my new friend to anyone. If Johan called Shabana a beast our first morning of classes, I could imagine what others with similar dispositions at the academy might do if they learned about the rock troll sheltering in a cave outside of town. I nodded. Something like that.
So it's all true.
His gaze shifted to the scorched soil.
You did all that.
I hesitated, but there was no denying it. There'd been witnesses. Considering the whispers when I came up the stairs, I think word has traveled, and you already know the answer to that question.
I didn't mean to pry, but you can't blame them for being a little in awe of you. I mean, no disrespect, but you aren't level 50, yet you wield such power. No one understands how you do it.
While I could have confided in him my suspicions that the demon's empowerment spell accounted for the majority of the power I'd wielded, and that he'd given it to me hoping I'd kill Roshan, I squinted with suspicion instead. And what? You want to understand? He flashed both palms and waved them.
Not at all. If you don't want to talk about it, you don't have to. I mean, you barely know me. I'm thrilled you even let me in your room.
My muscles relaxed. You showed the good taste of distrusting Johan the first day of class. Anyone with such refined judgment is welcome, I chuckled. His expression hardened.
That one is not to be trusted.
What's the source of your ire with him, exactly?
He's a bully. Latched on to me the day I walked onto campus. His loose lips hurl insults without regard. He's the entitled son of a powerful man in Trowsby, the High Chancellor of the council there, and he makes little effort to hide it. But I don't have to tell you. Didn't he lock you in a room in the below or something?
I nodded. Guess word really does travel around here.
Small minds gossip. I'm sure you know that.
Actually, I don't. Or I didn't. Outside of the occasional traveling zealot or tax collector, I didn't cross paths with many people until just days ago. He folded his arms across his chest, then turned his body toward the window, where he tracked a wispy line of clouds painted orange by the setting sun.
Probably want to go back to the farm then.
I don't think there's anything left. I've met a few people who seem nice. My employer is wonderful. Shabana has been a boon. I nudged his arm with my elbow. You don't seem so bad.
Thanks. I'm glad my nosiness doesn't offend.
Cast away the thought. The patrol appeared again. This time they strolled into view from the opposite direction along the edge of the field, closer to us. Their heads turned constantly from side to side as they scanned for trouble. We stood in a companionable silence for a minute. From the corner of my eye, I caught the subtle turn of his head. His gaze lingered on me for a long moment. Is there a bug in my ear?
What?
He stuttered.
No, I was just...
He reached up and I jerked. A slow smile crossed his lips and his hand paused in midair.
Trust me?
I considered for a moment, then nodded. He pinched a thin strand of my hair and pulled it toward him. A strange warmth passed over my body, although I didn't find his gaunt features attractive.
It suits you, but I don't think it was like this before.
My eyes widened as I reached for the strand and held it out. It was white as the snow in which I'd nearly frozen to death. What in the world? He shrugged. I dropped the strand, then yanked handfuls of hair forward to check them. Is there more? He shook his head, chuckling.
No, just that bit.
I thought of Mora and Magister Lyra. They had strands of gray like that. Then my eyes jumped to Harbin's line of gray along the part in his own hair. He shook his head.
My father has the same gray line. An unfortunate gift he passed down. I suspect your casting earlier caused yours.
It was like he read my mind. Is it common? I recalled Roshan's shining raven hair. Does shadow magic cause this? He shrugged both shoulders.
I'd be the last to know. I joined the light school for a reason.
The patrol passed out of sight again, which brought an idea. I wonder if you do me a favor.
Just ask it.
Harbin replied without hesitation. I need to go to the chapel tomorrow, but I'd like to avoid being seen. His eyebrows knitted together.
Wanting to visit the altar for a blessing, are you?
A blessing? He nodded.
Roshan can cast buffs upon people at the altar. They last a full day. You know, stamina and the like.
He shook his head.
It's random. Her goddess decides.
Her goddess? Do I sense a shortfall of piety, Master Harbin? He chuckled.
I don't find my fate is changed either way by prayer. When I was alone in the world, starving, the goddess didn't send bread.
How did you survive?
Like I told you, I went to Millbury where I met a man who knew what the faculty were doing here. Since I had a mana pool, he saw me fed, then brought here.
Oh, that's right. He gazed at me in silence, as if waiting for a response. Since my intentions had nothing to do with the altar or the priestess, and I didn't want to give away my intent to leave town, I didn't answer. He finally broke the silence.
So if you want, I'll watch the guard and let you know when it's clear, but you might want to wait until tomorrow morning. Since there are no classes, I expect the other students will sleep in. If you're up early, you could be in and out before they return. I imagine working a farm all your years leaves you no stranger to an early rise.
You imagine correctly.
I'll knock on your door tomorrow, then. Should I also watch for Master Rashan?
It would be nice to know if she's around. That seemed to satisfy his curiosity, or at least tamp it down. He nodded and stepped away from the window.
You coming for the late meal?
You're going to find out soon enough, so I'll just tell you. I'm not a student anymore. I'll be moving to the master's dormitory tomorrow, so I doubt I'll be eating my meals in the dining hall.
Oh.
One side of his nose twitched.
Too bad. I would have enjoyed a little company. But hey, the masters probably eat well, and if you end up dining with them, you might pick up some tricks.
He paused, his forehead wrinkled.
Or will you be giving up magic?
No, I plan on learning magic. Let's just say arrangements are being made.
Ah, I see.
But his tone left understandable doubt.
Well, I'm going to eat. Can I sneak you something?
A very kind offer, thanks. But no, I have some food stashed away from work. It'll sustain me.
I'll take my leave then.
When Harbin left, he closed the door behind him. Then I rushed over and turned the lock as if someone might come rushing in the second he was gone. A moment later, I was yanking open my dresser, shoving aside my few clothing items, then withdrew the scrolls. I flipped the cap off the first cylinder, dumped the parchment onto the bed, then carefully unrolled the dry paper lest I tear it. At first, the runes appeared as scribbles. Then they shifted before my eyes to form readable letters. Lesser Scroll of Intellect. Permanently adds 2 intellect to the reader's attributes. Type, Magic Scroll. Level requirement, NA. Requires runecrafting skill of rank 10. Required language, Elven. With a runecrafting rank of 11, I barely fit the bill. I imagined what Baba called nosy nags pressing their ears to my door as I eyed the lettering. Then I read the scroll in a voice I hoped was too low to hear. Manta bupestra scintilla roche. My skin glowed, then golden rays shot through my pores. An instant later, the light was gone. I eyed the crack under my door in wonderment as to whether it could have been seen by others. Stop being so darned paranoid. A message box popped up on the left side of my interface. Congratulations. You have read Lesser Scroll of Intellect. You have gained 2 points of intellect, plus 16 mana. Your runecrafting skill has reached rank 12. Another pleasant surprise. Gaining a skill point when I hadn't actually drawn a rune. I balled a fist, pumped it in victory, then switched to the main tab in my interface. It displayed only the stats I wanted to see instead of the longer form, for which I was thankful. Contessa of Millbury, human, level 9 thaumaturge, strength 14, dexterity 4, intelligence 8 plus 1, wisdom 4, constitution 27, charisma 6. The scroll disintegrated into shimmering motes that drifted, then evaporated into thin air. It made sense such an item would only be usable once if the goddess desired the balance among beings in Enora. I dumped the next scroll out, then unrolled it. The runes on this one seemed simpler, with fewer lines and symbols. Although I didn't know why, blurring my vision as I stared at them caused them to slither across the page and unfold into text faster than the last. Lesser Scroll of Wisdom. Permanently adds 2 wisdom to the reader's attributes. Type, Magic Scroll. Level requirement, NA. Requires runecrafting skill, rank 10. Required language, Elven. The same fanfare involving my glowing pores and a sense of power rushing through my blood followed when I read. Congratulations. You have read Lesser Scroll of Wisdom. You have gained 1 point of wisdom, plus 2 mana recovery per second while in combat, plus 4 mana recovery per tick while out of combat. Your runecrafting skill has reached rank 13. My mind wandered to my friend working across town at Luli's in my stead. I found myself longing to share these achievements with her. I'd have considered sharing those scrolls if it hadn't been for the events of recent days, suggesting I'd needed every advantage I could get if I was going to survive. A certain demon had dared expose himself on the academy grounds, and I inferred from his brazenness that a conflict lingered in my future. And when you kill him, what then? I shook my head at my inner voice. I'd deal with that wild boar when I came to it. Perched on the edge of my bed, staring out the window, I planned the next day. If I got out of town early enough, if I remained undetected, and if I could read the pile of scrolls or some subset of them before I returned, then I might be better prepared for Wyzen the Cruel.
Or you could serve at my side and harness power you've never imagined.
You killed my father. You tried to force me to kill Roshan. I stood, then stared outside the window. The sun had just dipped below the mountains. If you think I would help you in any way, you're delusional.
You will come of your own accord or by force. It makes no difference to me, Contessa of Milbury.
How do you penetrate my mind, demon? My fists balled up until my fingernails dug into my palm's flesh. I closed my eyes and focused hard, trying to force him out of my head. Then his words ceased. Had I locked him out of my mind? It was impossible to say, but I didn't speak to him again, and Wyzen didn't respond. The room gave a harsh tilt, and I clutched the quilt atop my mattress, hoping to steady myself. When the moment passed, my senses seemed to sharpen. The world around me became clearer. Drawson Welling has spent 8 attribute points on your behalf. You have gained 5 points of intellect. You have gained 3 points of wisdom. Although the interaction with Wyzen the Cruel dampened the experience, I took solace that my binding to an ally like Drawson Welling presented these boons. My new mentor would empower me so one day I could burn my mortal enemy to ashes. And that was something to be thankful for. Chapter 35. Raps upon my door yanked me from my slumber. When I came to, the outside was awash in black, and I realized I'd nodded off. An image of my father's coarse, whiskery face evaporated, so I knew I'd been dreaming about him. But the image slipped away as quickly as the circumstances in my sleep. I grunted as I kicked off the quilt, then crossed the room. My hand shot out for the curved bronze door handle, then stopped as memories of yesterday piled high. Wyzen the Cruel. Roshan's horrified features when she detected my fever. The Magister's distrust. The Shadowcaster who'd silenced me. But the abundance of caution came predominantly from the last still image of the other students whispering in the hall. Why had they been there if not to witness my return? Elrin didn't even reside on the top floor. They'd gathered to see me, and that fact sent warning chills through me. Tess? I cracked open the door, peeked, then swung it wide. Shabana, thank goodness. She held out a folded cloth, its black sheen divided by velvety trim. I come bearing gifts. May I come in? What an Enora? I eyed the robe as I waved her in. Then I closed and latched the door. Rules that applied to students of the opposite sex sharing space in a private setting surely didn't apply to students of the same sex, but I hadn't cared before, and I certainly didn't now as I wiped the remaining sleep from my untended eye. Did I catch you slumbering? Shabana set down the clothing, straightened my quilt, then sat at the bottom of my bed. Although she'd caught me sleeping, her posture didn't indicate any intent to let me return to it. Somehow, her entitlement brought half a smile to my lips, and I found I had no desire to hide it. Her single betrayal lingered far behind us. Yes, I turned in early. How was Luli's? Her chin dropped. If I didn't know how challenged you were, I'd count you the luckiest woman in Warrington. How did you manage to land such a sweet employer? She came to the kitchen and with fresh queries about you every time she whittled down the line out front. What did you do to so endear her? Are you implying I don't endear you to me thusly? Bite me, Tess. I would never. It's an expression. Quite a strange one. Another Foundation thing? She nodded. Don't try to change the subject. I don't know what you did, but I doubt your charisma score is high enough to have made Luli so concerned for you. What is it about you that draws our love? I jerked. Is it love, then? Again with the subject change. Bite me, Shabana. More proof of how quickly you adapt. Since you don't endeavor to answer, I'll change the subject to one of my choosing. When I don't follow your social etiquette, you make new rules? She tapped her nose. Exactly. I didn't question the gesture this time. Shabana grabbed the robe, then snapped it in front of her. It unfurled. She held it up for examination. I got my tailoring skill up to rank 20 before I left the Foundation, so it's capped until I reach level 10 in combat ranking. The weaving master let me work on this after hours the night before last. I figured you're going to need it. It's for me? My heart thumped against my ribs with excitement as I winked my eyes in succession. Acolyte's Robe of Magic Resistance. Level 7. Type, Robe. Slot, Torso. Quality, Uncommon. Durability, 50 of 50. +2 damage inflicted with shadow spells. Magic attack damage reduced by 15%. Movement impairing effect duration cut by 50%, plus 0.05% movement speed. But its attributes, they're for... She cocked one eyebrow and pressed her lips together. What? For shadowcasters? She tilted her head back and laughed. When she did, the robe jostled in her grip and she dragged it toward her heaving bosom where it quaked with her. Oh, Tess, you're so naive. Her laughter receded to a chuckle. Then she trained her eyes on me. You think you're so slick, don't you? So amusing. But we're in the School of Light. Don't you think people detected you the moment you came into class? And besides, I was there when you cast that demon all the way across the plateau at the Foundation. Have you ever heard of light magic that does that? I projected the humorous sensations lifting my spirits through an exaggerated sideways twist of my lips. I lacked the perspective to know either way. She tossed me the robe. Try it on. I couldn't get it to pop intellect, but you might be able to use your augmentation stone on it. Pop intellect? I ran my thumbs over the robe, then turned my gaze on Shabana. She read me with ease. Again. You have nothing I've never seen, Tess. Would you like me to turn my back? Of course not. A lie, but she didn't detect it, and I didn't want to seem like some strange prude. I pulled the exercise shirt in which I slept over my head, then slipped into the robe. Once I clasped all the clips down the front, I stretched my arms to display her creation. A warming sensation passed over me, and not just because of the thickness of the robe. I love it, Shabana. I threw my arms around her. She hesitated as if she hadn't expected the embrace, then relaxed into it, holding me tightly. She whispered into my ear, This is what friends do. Would you like to augment it? I nodded with my face pressed into her shoulder. Although she held it for me and I tried my best to steady my jumping hand, the level 7 robe proved a difficult subject when paired against my novice hands. I did gain a rank in augmentation regardless of the failure, but found the process unforgiving. Augmentation failed. You may not try to augment this item again until your augmentation skill has reached rank 5. Shabana read the disappointment in my features. She gave my back 2 firm claps. Well, at least I know you fail at something. I fail at everything. She shook her head and then smirked. Go to sleep, Tess. I'll see you tomorrow. As she turned toward the door, I snatched her wrist, then pulled her toward me to kiss her cheek. It was much smoother than Baba's had been. Thank you, Shabana. You're a good friend. Her face colored a little, then her head bobbed almost imperceptibly. It was the least I could do. Now back to sleep. You must be exhausted after today. We'll catch up tomorrow. I'll be gone in the morning, but I'll come get you in the afternoon. Where are you going? I didn't want to draw her into my temporary escape when so many things could go wrong. I could get caught leaving, or worse, and she would be associated with my misdeeds. So I shook my head. Some secrets I must also keep. I shoot her with both hands. Go, 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 go. When the first hint of light graced the field behind the dormitory the next morning, I lingered at my window in wonderment about a new pair of elven guards patrolling. I was inside what had been described as an instance, which I'd understood to mean a place set aside from the outside world. Just when the concept started to take root, the silence of the pre-dawn morning allowed for contemplation, and any understanding I'd gained was washed away. If the interior of the academy was a magical space separated from the outside world, how was it I could see the leather-clad elves pacing across the field outside? Was my window real or some portal through which I viewed the outside world? From the day I'd fled the farm, my mind window had bloomed into this incredible tool that read my thoughts, showed me what I wanted to see in an instant, and displayed much more than I'd ever imagined possible. Then there were the combat ranks, the spells, the occupational information. It was an ever-expanding source of information that tracked my progress through life. Did the goddess protect our innocence by binding us to our parents at birth? Did other people's sires prepare them for the day they'd be unbound? How many remained bound for longer than 17 years? Could it be that non-combatant, rural people like me often spent their whole lives without the added knowledge? No. Then their parent would die, they'd become unbound, and they might be quite old themselves. None of it made any sense. I just have to operate within the context of what I knew, then try to learn more. Baba was gone, which meant I'd never get the answers I really wanted. But it would have been nice to know what a strange world I'd actually lived in all that time I was pulling weeds. As they crossed the field, the leather-clad guard raised his torch. His partner, a white-haired woman with braids reaching halfway down her back, waved a hand and extinguished the fire in an instant. The first opened a small bag on his hip, then stuck the head of the torch inside. I watched, bemused. It would never fit. But then the torch vanished. What in the utter? A tap so quiet I wondered if I'd actually heard it came at my door. I cracked it, spied Harbin shifting his gaze in either direction, then poked my head out. His voice came in a low whisper.
Good. You're dressed. New robe?
Yes, a gift from a friend.
I guess Shabana's quite the weaver.
He cocked an eyebrow, then cast his gaze to the right.
Rashan left the temple and is on her way down the street. Don't know where she's going. The guards changed a little while ago, but if you time your entry through the back while the new one is patrolling toward the gate in front, you should be able to slip by. But you also have to keep an eye out for the two who patrol the fields. They're pacing a wide arc around the dormitories, to the back of the chapel, then turning back. So you'll have to watch both directions.
It warmed my heart that he'd not only watched for an opening, but also tracked their movements to my benefit. This is so nice of you. How long did you watch? He shrugged.
Just for a little while last night, then a bit this morning. Since they've asked the students to stay inside the academy until we're sure the demons are gone, it proved a little tricky.
He threw his arms to the side.
I kind of stand out, but I kept to the shadows and evaded notice.
Stealthy, are you?
I've been known to keep a low profile. When you're on your own in the wilderness, it suits. But enough of that. If you're going, this is the time. You can watch the guard from the side door of the west dormitory. When he wraps around the chapel, keep a keen eye to the right for the patrol. I tested the path and checked the door to ensure it was unlocked. You should be fine.
Why are you helping me, Harbin? Again he shrugged, but this time with only one shoulder and less effort.
Because you've had a hard time of it lately, and I know how that feels. Your gratitude is appreciated, but you should cast it off so you can focus on your task. I don't know where you're going or what you're up to, but I would appreciate your assurances that you'll be careful.
He picked at a fingernail.
I don't have many friends here, and it'd suit me if you come back in one piece.
I was suddenly so elated to have another person to trust, I decided to display it. I reached into my dresser and retrieved the key to the Worcester study. If anything happens to me, will you please see that Master Welling gets this?
Oh, yes.
The lines of his forehead deepened.
I'll see to it.
Without thinking, I pressed my lips to his cheek. A surge of warmth washed over me, but I forced it away. Thank you. His lips twisted into a surprised smile.
You're welcome. Now go.
I reached up to touch the end of the staff strapped to my back and wondered if I was mistaken to feel a sense of security from its presence. After all, I wasn't exactly proficient in its wielding. Harbin stepped away from my door and pattered in the opposite direction as I turned right, headed for the stairs at the other end of the landing. At the end of the downstairs hallway, I peeked into the library. No one manned the desk, and I didn't spy any early risers occupying the long tables, so I sped across the space. When I reached the other end, another quick glance confirmed the hallway was empty. My heart pounded in my chest as the door leading outside seemed to creep further away. But I closed the distance, and when I finally arrived, I peeked through the windows. An elf in full white plate circled the back of the chapel. My heart skipped a beat as I hid behind the door. When I knew I'd evaded detection, my pulse resumed the lesser, though still accelerated thumping. The elf circled the chapel, then stopped. His head whipped around. I ducked. As I crouched behind the door with my head below the little windows, I imagined a student popping into the hallway and seeing me, the girl who cut swaths of hellfire through the field and drew demons to the academy, hiding like the little wretch she was. When I summoned the courage, I raised my head just enough to peek out. The chapel guard was speaking to the two I'd seen in the field. A silent curse that didn't honor the goddess skittered through my mind. Just my luck. Move on, people. Just a few moments later, they returned to their roots. When I was certain they'd have rounded the corners that would block their sightline of the cobblestone walkway, I yanked open the door, slipped through, held it so it closed silently, then skipped every other stair as I sped toward the chapel. My head swiveling in both directions, I dashed for the door. It felt like it took 4 days to get there. When I slipped inside, I expected to see Roshan waiting for me. Although bathed in the light, something about that woman put the creeps in me, like she possessed a sensor to detect mischievous young people. Maybe because she knew I was one. But the room was barren, and I slipped into the side room without problems. I cast inner illumination in the dim space, then made haste down the stairs. Your light magic skill has reached rank 3. I had a fleeting thought about the strange world nestled beneath the simple one in which I was raised. Then the sight of the grate at the bottom of the stairs wiped it away. Johan had struggled to raise the thick iron dome that day they'd trapped me in the Warsager's study. Could I do it? I bent at my knees, grasped the handle with both hands, then heaved. It didn't budge. I grunted with effort as I tried again. Then I noted the latch on one side that held the grate in place. I flipped the obstruction away. It squeaked and the sound echoed through the narrow space. I swept my gaze toward the stairs behind me. Of course no one was there. Calm down. But no matter how I tried, I couldn't calm the thumping in my chest. There'd be no relaxing until I was safely back in my room. So I might as well get on with it. This time the grate eased back with little struggle. I relished the knowledge of how weak Johan was as I stepped onto the ladder, reached for the handle on the underside, then pulled the grate down before descending. Last time I'd left it open, and after the wolf had attacked me, I'd looked up to find Roshan staring down through the opening. I didn't want to draw her suspicions if she just happened to check the area like she had that day. When I reached the bottom, I sped up the circular channel running under the academy until I reached the metal barring it from the outside. After a quick glance into the open field for any signs of demons, I pushed open the secret door and dashed into the field. A snake bit me,